Hey everyone, it's Dan Semitovich. I'm the other host of Deviant, and while Andrew's been doing an amazing job of bringing the tragedy of the Hart family homicides to life, I've been working on finding stories to tell for after we're done with this one. So stay tuned for that. This is the last episode of the Hart family homicides. And as we've been saying, there's plenty to experience with the story beyond just the podcast, to see some of the documents and videos and hear some of the sound that didn't make the show. Visit our Patreon, deviantpodcast.com, and visit us on social at deviant.podcast on Instagram and TikTok. You can talk to us there. So with all that said, let's get to the show. And just so you know, there are parts of this show that some listeners may find difficult.
In the first episode of this series, we tell you about the Hart family house just outside of Woodland, Washington, where they live and the kids are homeschooled by their adoptive mother, Jen. The drive up to that house from Woodland, just a couple of miles, is a windy, leafy, two-lane road. The kind where you should take the turn slowly unless you know where you're going. When you bear right onto a gravel driveway, you see a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch-style house. And this house is the Hart family's last stop. It's the last stop after Minnesota and Sarah's misdemeanor charge, after the school in Westland, Oregon, and the numerous instances of the kids asking classmates for food, after the anonymous call saying Jen and Sarah are withholding food from the kids. Outside that house, there are chicken coops, there are garden boxes, and there's a 2-car garage. Jen and Sarah buy the house on May 5th of 2017. And across the gravel driveway, their neighbors, Bruce and Dana.
Really get much of a vibe. They were very private. We had 1 or 2 interactions with them when they very first moved in, and then that was pretty much it.
That's Dana, and she still lives in Woodland with Bruce.
When we first were looking into who might have purchased it, the real estate agent lady said that it was a family and that they were, very outgoing and nature loving. And then when they finally moved in, we were wondering where the family was because we never saw kids ever.
But within 6 months, that changes. In the middle of a fall night in 2017, Hannah Hart sprints across her front yard and over the driveway her family shares with Bruce and Dana.
So she rang the doorbell about 2 a.m. And first of all, nobody rings our doorbell, so that was odd and kind of startled us. But when we opened the door, she came rushing in and she had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, covered in bramble, like blackberry brambles. And she was pretty distraught.
When Hannah gets inside, she runs up the stairs to Bruce and Dana's bedroom.
She was pretty crazed, but telling us how they were abusing her and that they were racist, and she wanted us to take her to Seattle. So we were trying to calm her down and talk to her. And I remember telling her they would have never adopted you if they were racist. And she was very insistent on that. So then we heard them coming. So I asked her to go downstairs until I could talk to somebody. But in the meantime, I don't know how, but she ran back up to my bedroom and was hiding, crouched down between my bed and dresser.
Not far behind are Jen, Sarah, and the rest of the kids, fanned out across the yard with flashlights.
When they came to the door and we answered it, they just plowed in, all 7 of them, and started, talking and telling us that they were looking for her. But they started just going through our house and they ended up finding her upstairs. And Jen had told Sarah, you go away, let me just talk her down. We'll be down in a minute. And when she came down with Jen, she was just robotic and apologized for putting us through all this. She wouldn't even look at us when she was talking, and then they just left.
The next day, Bruce and Dana are still trying to put together what it is they saw the night before when the doorbell rings.
About 7 a.m., they come back, ringing the doorbell. So we figured we better just deal with it. And all the kids and the 2 moms, and they sat and started just being all friendly, telling us all kinds of stories and how they had decided to school because one of the kids had been, I think it was Devante, had been treated poorly, and that they moved out here to get away from all of that. Just like normal talk, right? Then they kind of ended up ultimately kind of whispering, but yet loud enough for Hannah to hear that I don't know if they actually said she was bipolar, but alluded to the fact that, she had some issues. And so I thought, well, that all made sense, right? They just were so casual that I totally bought into the story.
This story is still clearly raw for Dana. It still makes her tear up thinking about what could have been different that night. In November, shortly after the incident, Dana, who knows something isn't right next door, tells her dad about the entire thing.
I was torn. So I shared it with my parents. And my dad, he called and reported him, thankfully.
I don't mind. How can I help you?
Yeah, there's some kids that I feel is being highly abused in Woodland, Washington.
What's the address?
And how I know, if you're going up to the road to her house, it's a house on the right.
On the right? Okay, and what's going on there?
Well, they have 4 black children, which that part doesn't matter, and they're new here in Texas. But the other night, a little girl jumped out of the second-story window on the roof and then down onto the ground and ran to my daughter, and this is like 2 a.m, begging them to help her. And then the lady...
When did that happen?
About 3-4 nights ago.
For years, Jen and Sarah Hart avoid consequences. Minnesota and Oregon each have a shot at it. And now, it's Washington's turn.
The more I sit on it, I just can't live with it. Somebody's got to go there and check on these kids.
So how old was the little kid that did that ran to your daughter's house?
About 12 years old, 13. And when they came looking for her, she was begging my daughter not to let them know she was there. And then eventually my son-in-law let him know. And then she had all 4 of the kids come back later and to say everything was okay, and they were all standing at attention like they were just scared to death. And I think there's something very serious going on there. And they're here from Texas. The kids might even be kidnapped.
It's the closest anyone gets to confronting Jen and Sarah Hart.
Did the girl ever say why she was scared?
No, she was crying, and it was 2 a.m, and my daughter said the biggest problem was she's half awake. She couldn't believe what was going on. Since she's told me about it, I just can't live with it. I'm very concerned for these kids.
We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside all of society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant, the Hart Family Homicides, Part 5. Welcome back to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what people are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden. This is our final episode in our series about the Hart Family Homicides, and next week, my co-host Dan Semitovich and I will have a conversation about this story, what it is that's so baffling, and listen to some more from our interviews and our research we may not have gotten to in this series. In November 2018, when Dana's father makes that 911 call, it's the first time the state of Washington ever hears of Jen and Sarah Hart. The decision to homeschool the children is by design, because by doing that, the Hart kids are in effect completely off the radar. There's no exposure to teachers and administrators, who are both mandatory reporters, which means they're legally required to say something when they see signs of abuse. By the time they're living in that home in Woodland, Washington, Devante, Jeremiah, Sierra, Marcus, Hannah, and Abigail are isolated from the world. No school, no church, no friends. And after Hannah runs across the yard and Dana's father makes that 911 call, there's still no visit by CPS or the Clark County Sheriff's Office to the Hart home. Instead, the Clark County Sheriff calls Dana.
And when they reached out to me, they just blew me off and told me, and this was my fear, that, this is what happens to these kids, is they get reported and then retaliated against because they got reported. And so when the police contacted me, they pretty much just blew me off and said, there's no law against a child running away in Washington.
By the following spring, Bruce and Dana are keeping close tabs on what's going on across the driveway.
Devante was pretty much the only child that was allowed outside, per se. So I started trying to connect with him, running the garbage up and down, to the road. For the longest time, he wouldn't talk to me. And I did connect with him once or twice. And I could tell he wasn't supposed to be talking to me, like he was afraid. And the one time that he did, Jen saw him. And when he got to the house, I could tell her lecturing him. And then she made him stand in the rain for a while. I assume because he had spoke with me. I wanted to document it, so I had a full case to report with, facts. First time he came to us was on March 15th at 9 p.m., and he came over asking for tortillas, but he ran off before I could go get him. But he came back 5 or 10 minutes later, and we gave him a package of tortillas, and then he begged us to not tell his mom and ran off again.
Over the next few days, Devante returns multiple times while Dana and Bruce try to draw out of Devante what's happening inside the house.
He said that they were mean and didn't feed them meals, and sometimes days at a time. And then he went on to say that he doesn't like them and told us that they don't like us, but please don't say anything. And I asked how he was able to sneak over, and he said that they weren't very observant. Oh, he asked me to put the food by the fence where his mom can't see, and he said he was in trouble right now. And he begged to please to not say anything to his mom and said he had to get back. We asked him if they were abusing him, and he said yes, sometimes.
After getting blown off the first time she talks to authorities, Dana knows she needs solid, documented proof. So she gets receipts.
So I was building a case, and each time he came over, he opened up a little bit more. And I think it was a combination of comfort, but I honestly think it was a matter of life and death, that he recognized he had to make us understand how bad it was. So on March 23rd, which was the last time I saw him, once I had all of this information, I called CPS and reported it. They sent somebody out, and where we live, we could see the road. I saw them looking for our driveway, so I called her and, directed her. We pointed over to their house, and CPS went over there, and she wouldn't answer the door. And so CPS put a card in the door. And after they left, obviously, Jen saw the note.
This moment, when CPS arrives, when Dana points them to the house, when CPS knocks and leaves a business card, when Jen refuses to answer the door, all of that is a pivot point. That's because after running for years, it looks like Jen and Sarah are out of options. They're boxed in. Based on what we know about the timeline of when CPS leaves the house and when Sarah gets home from work, it's safe to assume Jen called her to let her know the jig was up. Here's Detective Adam Beck of the Clark County Sheriff's Office speaking at the coroner's inquest. He's working the Hart case from the Washington side. He interviews Sarah's coworkers and Bruce and Dana.
Her coworkers report that she worked a normal shift that day, and then she leaves work at about 17:26, which is about 5:30 in the evening, and is driving the white sedan. While at work, they kind of had some indications there might have been some problems at home, arguing with her wife.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, yeah.
Shortly thereafter, Sarah comes just racing up the driveway. And her normal schedule, she shouldn't have even been home at that hour.
I'm sure that when the phone call to the work, Sarah's work was made, it was, you need to get home, we got to go.
Yeah, I think when Sarah got home, they had been had one more time, because we've all found out since that they had been reported everywhere they went. And I honestly kind of believe, from things I have gleaned from talking and reading from other people, that Jen probably maybe was kind of spiraling.
So they bolt.
They apparently left abruptly. They had knocked down part of their retaining wall and took off. We never saw them actually leave, so I don't know when they left.
As the block wall came out to the driveway, the corner of the wall looked like it was knocked over. The blocks were on the ground, and it was kind of the corner near the driveway. So one of the theories was that it would be possible if a car was backing out or something in a hurry, it might have toppled over the blocks as it was exiting the driveway. The neighbors report that the next day they noticed that the car was gone and that the blocks were knocked over. And I asked them, is that something you would have noticed prior? And they said yes. So it's likely that it happened overnight at some point when the gold Yukon disappeared.
As they exit the driveway, they begin the nearly 600-mile journey that ends at the cliff near Juan Creek in Mendocino County. They leave Woodland behind, just as they do in Minnesota and Oregon. On March 26th, CPS tries again.
Dispatch, can I help you? Who are we checking on?
The mothers are Sarah and Jennifer Hart,
Okay.
and according to my intake, they have 6 children in the home.
Okay.
The eldest being 19, so not technically legally a child.
Okay. And are you with CPS or you are the concerned citizen?
No, I'm with CPS.
CPS returns to the Woodland house. They weren't able to get a hold of anybody the first time. Obviously, all this is with hindsight. At the time, we didn't know anything about them leaving or anything like that. The neighbors hadn't reported that. So CPS returns to the house to try and continue their investigation about the alleged withholding of food. And again, nobody answers the door. They do note that the Yukon that was there the previous visit was no longer there.
And you've tried 2 times and you can't reach them?
Correct. I've knocked on the door twice. Different cars have been moving in and out, I noticed, so I feel like someone's there.
Okay. And when were you there last?
This morning, 9:15, 9:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a deputy on the way, and he will call you back when he has something to tell you.
By the time that CPS worker makes the 9:30 a.m. stop at the house, and by the time she calls 911 to begin a welfare check, the Hart family SUV is already upside down, rocking back and forth in the Pacific Ocean. Whether or not that's the intended location when they leave home in Washington, we'll never know.
So I think when this happened, they felt like their only, I don't know what the word is, their only option was suicide. I feel like they came, when Sarah got home, they devised this plan, did whatever they had to do, knowing they would never come back.
Not everyone feels the same. Here's Jake Slates. He investigates the crash for the California Highway Patrol. You heard him in a previous episode.
I believe that they left their house not knowing exactly what they're going to do, and that they left in a very hasty manner. Example of being knocking over those blocks, forgetting the luggage, not taking toothbrushes. I feel that they didn't know what they were doing, even though we know Sarah's phone was searching those types of questions about death and suicide and how drowning can be painful. I don't believe that they were committed to that at that point. I think their ultimate goal was to get to Mendocino County, but sometime after that, while driving around on the Mendocino coast, they both decided that this was going to be the end.
Tom Allman, the retired sheriff and coroner of Mendocino County who led the investigation into the Harts, feels the same. Sort of.
I don't think that they started by saying, we're going to go to Westport, California, and plunge off a cliff and kill our family. You asked me what I thought. I don't think it was that thought out. This was a situation where they left because they felt they had to, and I don't think they had any place left to go. And they had a vehicle, and one of them had, on their phone, had researched basically how much Benadryl to put a kid to sleep. And then they went to Safeway and they got bananas and Benadryl. And whether it was both their decisions or just one of their decisions, and I truly believe it was both their decisions, they just did a Thelma and Louise and took their kids with them in a horrific situation, which at this point hasn't changed any laws.
Bruce and Dana still live in the same house, across the driveway from what was once the Hart family home. It's a reminder of what could or couldn't have been, depending on how you look at it.
I do harbor some guilt, but I don't know that. I mean, obviously, even with it getting reported, it didn't help.
Well, we all want our privacy, and it's like a double-edged sword, where we don't want the government or agencies to stomp on our privacy, but yet that's exactly the kind of things that keep us from finding out bad situations.
We've spoken plenty about Jen and Sarah, about what investigators find at the crash site, what leads them to determine this is a murder and not an accident, and of course about the earlier warning signs that CPS misses. I wish I could talk more about the children, but because of Jen and Sarah's carefully built wall of secrecy, there just isn't much to know about who they were. But there is what they might be now if certain things go one way instead of another. Marcus Hart, who was 19 years old at the time, would be out of college. Hannah would have a driver's license. Devante, Jeremiah, and Abigail, they're in college. And Sierra's probably figuring out where she's going to go. And for some of the people connected to the case, they still carry the weight of what might have been, what they could have said, should have said, or what they should have seen. Here's Irene Van Rickingham. You heard her a few episodes back. She knew the Harts from their music festival travels.
So much of what happened to the Hart kids is a consequence of people not paying attention, including myself, and I have to own that. And I do have to live with that, because if I was in a place where I was not caught up in the festival scene, focused more on my inner work, aware of how to take accountability for my role in the world, I may have been able to at least notice like something's up and maybe have some hard conversations.
It forever will be the ongoing question.
That's former Portland police officer Brett Barnum from the photo with Devante.
Could it have started with me? But then we could also back it up even further and take it to the police or the Child Protective Service folks that did the reports in another state.
Here's retired Mendocino County Sheriff's Lieutenant Shannon Barney. He worked the case with Sheriff Allman.
They're browbeat to lie, so when a CPS goes out and they have 10 minutes to interview the kids and the kids say, no, we're fine, they don't have much else to go on. If they did have that public database that, if you uploaded the report from Minnesota that said they're withholding food, and you see a report from California saying they're withholding food, then you see a report from Oregon, if that Washington CPS worker could see that, that would change their entire mindset.
Did the ones that were here and say, hey, did that Child Protective Service officer or agent, did they drop the ball somewhere? Did they not see the signs and symptoms? Did they not follow up appropriately? My conversation was about him. It was about being a kid. It was about taking the uniform off and having him see me as a person rather than as a police officer. Mission accomplished that day, for sure. Mission accomplished. But then what he left me was something that resonates with me as far as validating my career, but also it's now become something that's very haunting for the rest of my life. That it's just like, man, was that the one kid that I could have helped? I helped him for a short time. Long term, I wish I could have, but the doors didn't open appropriately for me to do that.
I'll tell you that if somebody wanted to look at the missteps that were taken on this one, it would not take a 30-year-old detective, 30-year experienced detective to find the missteps. It appeared to me as if some decisions were made because that was the easiest decision to make. And sometimes the hardest decision to make is the best decision to make.
I would say that Jennifer used these children as props and only props. I mean, it would surprise me if she loved them at all. It was like she was using them.
We need a very simplistic, similar system where if there's a CPS allegation, then all it needs to have in there is the name of the police department and the phone number of the police department. Okay, it doesn't need to say anything other than that. And that way, if the parents move to a different state and there's another CPS allegation and a law enforcement officer or CPS runs that parent's name, it's going to say, hey, listen, call the Dallas Police Department at this phone number because they have information about this.
Sheriff Allman is still mad about this case, about the missed opportunities to stop Jen and Sarah, and about the cracks that all 6 of the Hart children fall through. He's tried raising some hell about it to the folks in Washington, D.C., to anyone who will listen, really.
When we're dealing with these interstate allegations, who is going to protect those kids? And when I've gone to Washington, D.C. and talked about it, it just didn't have the sex appeal for anybody to take me serious. Yeah, and they listened to me, they patted me on the shoulder and sent me off into the hallway and thanked me for coming in. I hadn't planned to retire in 2019. I'm not saying they were the sole decision, but it certainly played into it because, man, there's only so much a human being can take. And when you see 6 beautiful kids killed for no reason at all, you just shake your head and said, is this where our world is right now?
When you stand here at the Wan Creek turnout, where Jen and Sarah Hart murder their family, you'd never know what happened. The only sign is one single cross on the far right side edge of the cliff. It's for Devante, the only member of the family who still hasn't been found. He's forever frozen in that famous photo, hugging Lieutenant Barnum at the Portland protest.
When I actually look at the photo, when I think about Devante, that was this his cry for help? But I can't blame myself for that. I tried what I could do respectfully to their family, considering the circumstances that we were thrust into, in order to follow up and make contact. But in a 10-minute conversation with a child alone, when I break it down to all its parts and pieces, there isn't a single person out there who would have had the conversation I had with Devante about vacation, about art, about school, about life, about, that didn't try to open a door here or there to have him tell me something that, like, hey, I need some help, or my mom hurts me. That would have turned this the whole different direction. But there was none of that.
Irene Van Rickingham, the friend of the Hart family from their music festival days, still tries to reconcile who the mothers actually were with who she thought they were. But the photo, Devante hugging Officer Barnum, is still difficult.
Oh, man. I can't really look at it. I remember it. I could never forget it. But it's so interesting because the whole nation essentially took it and thought at face value, oh my gosh, this little African-American boy, this little black boy is finding solace in the arms of a white man at a Black Lives Matters demonstration. And it's like, you take it at face value as if like this is an image, that represents like the good in all of humanity. And then to come to think that Devante's tears speak a completely different story in that photograph, understanding in hindsight what he was surviving. Those tears are so much deeper that they encompass all of that and all of the strife and struggle that Black people face, as well as having a white mother who's using and abusing him to prop herself up, and he's completely alone, that no one can know about it, that no one can save him, and he's in the arms of an officer who's just going to let go of him and give him back to his white mom.
On this show, we look at different kinds of deviants. Serial killers, unsolved cases, people who use ideology to kill. But this story operates in its own sort of universe. The core of this case is 2 women who commit 6 homicides, for reasons we still don't know. But it's also the kind of case that forces us to look at ourselves and examine how we see others, if we're seeing what's true, what's real, and if it's not, how'd we miss it? Until next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is executive produced by Clark Goldman, Dan Samatovich, and me, Andrew Iden. Clark is our story editor and booker. The show is written and produced by me and Dan, with original scoring by Shuvo Sur. Sales, marketing, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.